Hey, good afternoon and welcome to another Big Deep Breath Friday. It is awesome to be with you all again, Jim Stern. Great to be with you guys and really press into a very difficult, certainly can be controversial, but absolutely very emotional and difficult subject. The reality that in the broken world in which we live in, mental health and mental health challenges and difficulties is an unfortunate reality that many people struggle with, many families struggle with, and it can even get significantly compounded when we're trying to understand the faithfulness of God and what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. When we ourselves might be dealing with mental health issues, or somebody in our family, a loved one, a friend is dealing with mental health issues as well. So I am really blessed and honored and excited to have Dr. Valdes in with us today. Dr. Valdes and I have been friends for 20 some odd years, and we've probably been talking together for about 18 of those years continuously. Lewis and I have a propensity to get in very long conversations about mental health issues and what that looks like in the gospel, what that looks like in the kingdom of God, and how do you reconcile mental health with the faithfulness of God and supernatural life. As we are driving down the road, Lewis and I are driving down the road to go do mission trips or working in some other endeavor that God has us co-laboring in the kingdom of God. So it's awesome to have somebody who has been battling on the front lines of the psychological world for 30 years to be able to set in Big Deep Breath with us and bring his wisdom and expertise. So Dr. Valdes, thank you, brother, for joining us.
You're welcome.
Yeah. You were telling me a couple of days ago that in the mental health world, there's a particular niche or specialty that you have, and I was trying to understand it a little bit, but you are far better equipped than I am to explain that to the folks. So tell us a little bit about your background and what your area of specialty is.
Okay. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm specialized in child and adolescent clinical psychology, and the clinical part of that points in the direction of the more severe areas of mental health issues, commonly called mental illness. Nowadays, they use terms like neuropsychiatric, neurobehavioral, which is a nod to the amount of research that has been done in the last 10, 20 years, understanding these kinds of problems from a neuroanatomical basis, which in the clinical range, clearly there's just like any biological, any kind of physical diseases and so forth, it's clearly established at this point in the clinical zone. Now, having said that, the whole mental health in general is vastly wider, and everyone participates in mental health. It would be like saying a healthy person doesn't participate in physical health because they're healthy. Well, it's still an issue. Even if you're healthy, it's an issue. So mental health is sort of the very wide umbrella mental illness that we're getting away from that kind of terminology as the research advances in calling it neuropsychiatric, neurobehavioral, neuroemotional. Those kinds of terms are a better fit and more accurate, actually, for what we're really talking about in the clinical zone.
Okay, so clarify that. So it seems like the prefix neuro is the big change or the big addition, clarification. And so when you're adding in the neuro, is it more of an emphasis on brain structure, physiological chemical issues, or what all does, when you're adding neuro, what all does that encompass?
Yeah, so structure and function. Structure comes into play when you're looking at traumatic brain injuries, TBIs, car accidents, head injuries, all the stuff going on in the NFL is all about the neuro. Clearly, some very painful issues there. So that's more of a structural, physical issue. The functional issues have more to do, combination of functional and structural is some of the neurotransmitter processes, And then you get into the functional components that have to do with, and by analogy, we always say wiring because everybody kind of understands wires and, connects this to that. So structure and function. And then the next step is the interaction between your bodily sensations, your perceptions of those sensations. So the things that happen to you environmentally and how those things affect neuroanatomy. And probably the most common thing that people are talking about these days is how they're showing how video games are changing the neuroanatomy of children.
Wow.
And there's some truth to that. They tend not to be permanent changes, but it depends. It really depends on how much, how early. The depth of the impact has a lot of variables to it, but clearly it's having an effect.
That's amazing. I just saw a study yesterday, the day before, where they were able to correlate, and I didn't read in depth enough, so I can't say definitively, but they were able to draw some correlation between an overuse of social media with a decrease in IQ.
Yeah, I mean, decrease in IQ, probably not. It may be a decrease in performance that would show up on an IQ measure.
Yeah.
But yeah, to change your IQ, an actual change, pretty unlikely. But it's almost impossible to increase your IQ, so to speak, once it's solidified.
Yeah.
But it is, you can make it go down. And so an article came out. This is actually a good study, a well done study, and there's a bunch of them. The whole marijuana debate across the country, that clearly excessive use of marijuana does have a real impact on IQ.
Yeah.
What's not known is if you stop and you kind of give your brain a workout, so to speak, over a period of time, can you recoup what you've lost? There's not any research on that yet. So there's a lot. It all, we can simplify the whole thing, clean living, and these things won't happen to you.
Yeah.
So I mean, just about anything you do that is obviously negative or compromises you is going to have some kind of impact like that.
So you mentioned earlier pediatric, a lot of emphasis in your background on pediatric care, pediatric mental health.
Yeah.
The kind of the common things that the quote unquote average, I don't know if that's the right word, average family, run of the mill family, or even, people would be familiar with ADHD, ADD, if that is even the correct term anymore. People that are on the autism spectrum, those kind of things are in your wheelhouse. Those are the kind of things that you all deal with on a regular basis.
Right. Yeah. So, so the autism spectrum disorders, the ASD and the ADHD, those are probably the two most commonly discussed. And fair enough, because there's a lot of that going on, but it's not as simple as those two labels indicate. There's all kinds of varieties in both of those categories, to the point that really every child has a unique presentation. Every child has a unique background. Every family, every environment, exposures, treatments, just there's so many variables involved. We can talk about those just for common language, common conversation. But the reality of those, it would be like saying cancer, and you'd go, okay, which? I mean, there's how many thousands of those? So it's similar to that. Those are good conversational labels, but the reality of that is a lot more complicated.
Yeah, so they provide good access points to get in the door, to walk down whatever splinter of the road that it goes down. And so there's the I've found that there's the symptom presentation of what it is that somebody is dealing with, but then there's also the emotional component of coming to grips emotionally in the first place with whatever you quote unquote have. But in the second place, for family members that are now in deep relationship, or even non-family members, but they're just in deep relationship with, and then there's that emotional component as well. So can you speak to that a little bit about the emotional struggle that people go through that you've seen, that children as they're coming along, and then parents having to identify, and oh my gosh, and what that looks like?
Yeah, so put it in three simple categories. So you have behavior issues, and everybody kind of knows what that is because that's something that you outwardly do. Then you have the emotional issues, and that got a lot of play 10-ish years ago. And bipolar disorder is the one that most people, depression is what most people would know. And again, nice entry points, but more complicated. It all has to do with mood regulation. And so the brain has a mood regulation system that is very important in regulating your reaction to the things that are going on around you. And that is actually one of the most common disorders, neuro disorders that we come across in the clinical world. And thankfully, there's some treatments for that. But that's a common. So you've got behavior, then you've got emotions, and then you have thoughts. Okay, cognition is the fancier word. So thoughts, emotions, and behavior. So cognition, the more recognizable of the cognition issues are when people's thought processes get messed up. So delusional systems, clinical paranoias, the schizophrenias, psychosis in general. Now, these three domains are interrelated for sure. But they tend to have an underscored emphasis in one of those domains. So when families are dealing with this, especially with children, because children's brain development is not differentiated enough in the early years to be able to identify what might be later on in life.
Yeah.
So kids can emote and then they can have erratic behavior, which looks like ADHD and may or may not be. It may be a mood regulation disorder, it may not be ADHD at all. Kids that truly have clinical neuro issues that are going to be long-lasting, chronic, sometimes lifelong, at some point in their early childhood, almost always they're going to have an ADHD diagnosis. And it's simply because they meet the symptom criteria. They may not actually be a garden variety frontal lobe ADHD kind of thing. It may be an underlying, it may be a psychosis, it may be an emotional disorder, but it's not expressed enough. So it's kind of like an infant who is crying. Well, they're crying because they can't talk. And so they're communicating, it's coming out of them, it's being expressed in that particular way. And so as you go through developmental milestones, the family's job and the professional's job is to track those milestones as they go and watch the development of the symptom patterns so that you can see which direction this is going, and then you adjust your interventions and your treatments accordingly.
Yeah.
If you try and hang on to, okay, well, it's ADHD, and 2 years later I'm still hanging on to that diagnosis, well, the brain might have developed long past that, and it needs to be looked at in a different way.
Yeah. So what have you seen though in the emotional struggle so let's just take a scenario where a child starts acting out and a parent believes that there may be something, and they take the child in for testing, and lo and behold, the child is diagnosed with ADHD, and it's just the entry door. We don't know what's going to happen in a few years down the road, but the parent or the parents are now confronted with the situation where their child is now diagnosed with a mental health condition.
Yeah.
Would you speak just a little bit to the emotional condition that the parents would go through to accept this? I know I don't know all sorts, but I know a number of people whose families just reject mental health issue as a condition altogether. So forget about cultural stigmas. These are families that just patently say mental health issues don't exist, and you really just need to bootstrap it, and what's wrong with you, and get off the couch and get real angry and you know, those kind of things. So can you speak to families and parents embracing that as a real deal, and what they go through emotionally to do that?
Sure. Yeah, very difficult, and very painful for a lot of families, and a lot of differences in cultural groups in how they react to that, and certainly denial and hope against hope that it's not what it
Yeah.
is not not an altogether bad first step, because you gotta really look and see and figure out, where's this coming from? Is this developmental? Might they grow out of it, kind of thing? And the good news is there is a significant portion of kids that do grow out of these things and go on fine, but a lot of them not. And so you've got to be humble about your approach, and not get too dug in on any belief that you have, even if it's the right belief.
Yeah.
You still have to keep your options open, because there's a lot of variables that come into play, and you want to use all of the variables to the child's greatest advantage and the family's greatest advantage. So don't hang on too tightly that it's not it, and don't hang on too tightly that it's it and it's it for all time. Both of those extremes is not the way to go. This whole thing is a process. If it's anything, it's a process.
Yeah.
And start the process, and wherever you start the process, you start. But be humble enough to continue to learn, to continue to observe authentically. Honestly observe what's going on around you. And then, use some sense. You reach out to professionals, talk to friends and family members, and, apply some good critical thinking to the whole enterprise. It'll save you a lot of resources, personal, family, emotional resources, as well as financial and otherwise.
Well, now I would imagine the first reaction is just shock.
Yeah,
It's absolute shock, and then sadness, and then anger, and then
Tears.
frustration. And in that initial shock, right? So let's fold in a couple other things. In that initial shock, so last week we had on Mark Collins when we were talking about spiritual warfare, and we believe, according to the scripture, that in the world in which we live, there are supernatural principalities that are actively working against us, right? Against walking in the love of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so I'm imagining this scenario where those parents get that first understanding that there's a diagnosis. Well, the enemy is right there to isolate, to make you feel like this is a death sentence. This is the end of life, and you're all alone. There's no way that you're just. And so as soon as that starts to wear off, and it really does need to wear off, you begin to find out that I would imagine you begin to find out that there are a lot of other people who are going through exactly what you're going through. And so to have those folks in your circles, or grow and getting wisdom with those folks. And so to be able to learn how to navigate that this isn't the end of life, that this can actually work out in some pretty fantastic experiences you can have. And so can you speak to that, about the challenges of coming to grips with that, and the importance of being around a community of people that have a similar path?
Yeah, and that's a tricky thing. So there are support groups and things like that, and they're difficult to maintain. The feelings of isolation of families with a child with mental illness or some disorder like that, or even an adult child that continues to live at home. The isolation that these people go through is just really, I mean, it's intense. And this is if your child gets diagnosed with cancer, God forbid, you're going to get a cake, and you're going to get people sending you dinners and all this stuff. Mental illness, you get a lot of sympathy and a lot of, ooh, that hurts. But it's so chronic, and it's such an unusual presentation, because when you bring those things into your social circles, it's not the same as if you broke your leg in a car accident or something. It just there's real implications to the interpersonal interactions that you have with others who are not necessarily going to understand why your child just did that behavior, or blurted something out, or acted impulsively, or had a tantrum, beyond what you would expect from their age group. So there's a lot of isolation with that, and having a support group and having people around you that understand is super important for the long-term health of the family, as well as the outcome of the issue for the child. The support group, having an unconditional positive regard around you, that can understand and isn't offended by or put off by and so forth, the kinds of things that you have to deal with, that can sort of normalize it with you, goes a long way to helping this process.
Yeah.
And the whole putting it, in the Christian ethic that you were just suggesting, if you're really following the love thy neighbor and do unto others as you would have them do unto you if you were in the same situation, and so on and so on. So much of the Christian message is about that kind of unconditional love. And that's super important. And a lot of churches are picking up on that. You can see groups forming in a lot of churches. Really good stuff. There needs to be a great deal more training involved with all of that, because it doesn't need to be, a sympathy thing. You don't walk up to a person in a wheelchair and pat them on the head and say, "Ooh, sorry." You treat them normal, as normal as possible. And so the same thing with people that have to face these kinds of issues. So a lot of training, so it doesn't have that sort of, inadvertently pointing out what you're trying to normalize by overly sympathizing with it or expressively sympathizing. There's just so much thought that needs to go into that. But yes, oh my gosh, families definitely support. They need a lot of support, a lot of love, and a lot of normalizing to make the outcome as good as it can be.
Yeah. So let's as followers of the Lord, right? This is Big Deep Breath Friday, and our goal is to not run away from any issue, regardless of how challenging or detrimental or difficult it is, and then to say, and despite the issue, we can still take a big deep breath and trust in the faithfulness of God and the goodness of God for our lives every single day of our lives. In some cases, easier, quote unquote, easier said than done, in particular in an area of mental health. I mean, you can't sprinkle a little Jesus, a little Bible verse, hey, God causes all things to work together for good, when your child is, doing their ADHD thing, or they're on the spectrum or whatever. And somebody just comes up to you and just tries to sanitize your situation with some trite little biblical invocation, and you just want to punch him in the face, like, that's not helping me very much at all. And so as much as you're able to, where is the goodness of God in families dealing with pediatric mental health?
Yeah, very difficult question. The answer lies from a spiritual Christian, worldview standpoint. The answer to that question is the same answer to families who have a child who has a degenerative disease, for example, that they're going to die young, a cancer that's terminal. It's the same answer. All chronic health issues, and now I'm not distinguishing mental health from physical health, because, in a lot of ways, they're the same. Yeah. Unfortunately, in some important ways, they're different. So if I have a cancer on my kidney, it doesn't affect you when I talk to you. When you've got a child who's having mood dysregulation episodes in the middle of a birthday party, that's got a significant impact. So it's trickier to answer that question within that context. But I without going into a dissertation about it, I want to say that I want to give the message that there is a great deal of support and hope and love from the love of God, from the Holy Spirit, from what Jesus taught us on how to live with each other. All of those things are very supportive. And if they're not supportive, the chances are it's not quite being it. There's some other issue that needs to be discussed because certainly being angry at God and angry at Jesus, and God can take it. I mean, he's got, he's thick-skinned. He can handle your anger towards him. And so getting that out as part of a process, again, the process, it's always a process in this field. And so having that kind of spiritual backdrop, and if you've got that worldview, there's a ton of help, a ton of support as you walk through what is unequivocally going to be painful and very unlikely to go away. It's not likely to be removed. It's a chronic condition like diabetes or any other. And I mean, there are people, I'm sure, that get cured, in a miraculous healing. It's just not common. And so to hang on that and to have people come up to you, Jesus is the answer. Well, I mean, Jesus is the answer, but not like that. He's not a magic wand. He's not a genie in a lamp. It's a whole different worldview that this is a real issue of the human condition. Lots of stuff in the human condition that ain't going away, because on earth as it is in heaven, that's part of our job. It's part of our purpose here, is to bring the love of God to this world, so that someday kingdom come will in fact be here, and we participate in that. So if you're within that worldview, there's an awful lot that can be done and that can be very helpful to families and kids as they grow up, understanding that they're a child of the living God, just like everybody else, and they've got a purpose. And I can show you kid after kid and family after family that have embraced that, that have had among the best outcomes that I've seen in my professional life.
I mean, it's always been super helpful for me to reflect on the severity of the brokenness of creation can only be understood. I feel like the depth of the brokenness of creation can really only be understood through Jesus on the cross. That the brokenness and the destruction of sin and the corruption of mankind and how it all just does not work the way God originally intended it. It is so broken and so severe that the remedy is not two Tylenol and call me in the morning. It's not an apple a day keeps the doctor away. The only remedy is the sacrificing of the incarnate Son of the living God. That is how broken and distraught we are. So that if we come to life from a perspective of entitlement, I'm entitled to health, I'm entitled to air conditioning, I'm entitled to good things, then we're set up for all sorts of failure. But if we come to life from a perspective of the cross and understand that the actual default of life is brokenness and vulnerability and woundedness, and then all of a sudden we're not surprised that we're seeing all of the different variations of destruction that we're seeing. And now we're looking to Christ, to God our Father and his faithfulness, who hates all of this. He hates all of this brokenness, and he sent the remedy of Jesus. And now, as you were so wonderfully saying, let your kingdom come, let your will be done, we become the image bearers of God's love and inbreaking in the way that we as followers of Jesus love and support family and friends who are battling these kinds of mental health issues. So speak for a second, if you will, to what you've said. You said just a minute ago that churches are getting better at this. So why do you think that is? For the longest time, and I think there's still a lot of this residual, churches never talked about mental health. And a lot of times in churches, mental health was more a result of lack of faith than it was anything neurostructural or physiological. So what do you think has happened where you've seen this shift? And what are a couple of things that you might encourage a church or a ministry to really consider for them to open up to the reality of mental health in their congregation?
Okay, you got it. You just opened up a lot of topics. So let me back up and capture the first part, and then I hope to remember to work through what you just said.
I'm taking notes, old guy.
So your what you just talked about in terms of the cross and all that, the churches, you know, that's their expertise, and that's a very deep, theologically sound, important, etc. within the Christian worldview. The average person doesn't have that as something that they can rely on when they're sitting there with a mental illness.
Yeah.
That's something that you have to grow into. You have to read a lot. You have to understand a lot to be able to invoke all of that. True as all of that is within the Christian world, that it takes a while to read enough of the Bible, read enough of interpretations, experience enough of life to be able to invoke that in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So the churches where there was a bigger rift in times past was in part because of that right there. They were missing where people were. People were crawling. They weren't walking, and let alone running. People were at a very early understanding of how do you make sense of this? Because it's not easy to make sense of this. It really isn't. You've got to bend a little bit. You got to have some faith a little bit, and you got to work through some concepts and some realities and your own issues. And there's so much that you have to work through. So people with mental illness in their families and such weren't being met where they were. They were getting this message of, well, Jesus, well, kind of like a Job-like thing where, well, I mean, you obviously must have sinned. You know, you were getting all this stuff. Well, now in the last 15, 20 years, you've got a much greater understanding in some churches, not all of them, but in a lot of them. And then, of course, a lot of people, pastors and such, have now experienced mental illness within their own families, and it made them take another hard look.
Yeah, that's a good word.
It sure does help when you can hold up a you know, nobody questioned broken bones, but it sure was nice to have an X-ray of it. Well, nobody questions mental illness anymore because now we have a brain map that we can show you. It's indisputable. It's always been indisputable, but now it's tangibly clear. The results in a clinical zone are very, very clear. And so that, you know, it becomes indisputable to any reasonable person. So when the church started giving that second look, and there's an increase in trust between the secular therapy world and the pastoral world, when they started collaborating, they started finding an awful lot of common ground. They started finding concepts that, you know, hey, wait a minute, we know that study. We know that empathy. We know what that means. We know, you know, getting things out, processing things. There was so much conceptual overlap. There started to be a natural growth together. Now there's still a long way to go. You know, there's still need for a lot of that. So, you know, the message to the churches is the same as to the families. There's a lot to read. There's a lot of good science out there. There's a lot of good, sensible, logical. Okay, if it's frilly and goofy sounding, if it involves chicken bones, then don't do it. You know, it's not. That's chicken bones. This isn't. Yeah, this isn't. This is not. I mean, we enjoy the mystery of all of this, but it's really not as mysterious as people want it to be. I mean, that sells good copy, but the truth is, if you get into the literature and you read about all this, both in the secular science literature and in the biblical literature, and you start reading the crossover literature between those two, this all makes sense. It's all logical. It's not frilly, you know, it's some, you know, subculture kind of thing. I mean, it's all legitimate stuff, but you got to find it. There's so much garbage out there. You've got to find it and you got to get to it. And if it doesn't make sense, well, it probably doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, the door into mental health, that you walk through that door, it's such an enormous enigma for so many people. You're a professional. You've been in the industry for 30 years, and you're saying there's so much of this that's enigmatic. And so for us lay people, I'm vocationally in ministry, but I'm a lay person when it comes to the psychology world. And so for us, it's just like, I don't even know where to start. And it's just a lot easier not to even get in, and it becomes intimidating. Much the same way for somebody who doesn't know a whole lot about the church, and they're going into a Bible store and they're trying to buy a Bible, and there's like 30,000 different versions of the Bible now, or they're trying to find a good church and they don't know what a good church is, or if the guy that they're listening to is right. It's the same way in the psychological world for us in ministry, going, well, okay, hey, Dr. Valdes looks like a pretty good guy, but I mean, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what an apple is in the psychological world. So I think it's spot on. I think it's really insightful what you said, that a lot of leaders in ministry all of a sudden started finding themselves in situations either in themselves with clinical depression, or with family members who are battling, and they themselves had to enter in and get some education. And so they were kind of, quote unquote, forced into, and then there's been this opening up.
Yeah. No, you're right on with that. And yeah, unfortunately, that's the hard work. There's no shortcut to this. You really have to spend the time educating yourself, getting with professionals, getting some consultation, and not taking any one consultation as gospel. Feel free to shop it around a little bit. And I say a little bit because there's some people that take that to the extreme, and then they never actually get anywhere because they never commit to any path. There are legitimate and good pathways that can bring reasonable amounts of relief, in some cases, tremendous relief, especially in the psychiatric world, with the advancements of some of the medications, and I get it. There's side effects and there's all these other variables involved. I'm not marrying medications either. That's my point. It's a process, and you have to leave open the options. But there should be progress. You shouldn't be, once you engage a professional, you shouldn't 3 months later still be hearing, well, we need to keep going because, well, yeah, but doc, I mean, we're not getting anywhere. Oh, but we will. Yeah, no. This is not an all or none deal one day to the next. This is a process. Yeah. And you should see and feel and sense the progress when you're involving yourself in this.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and I want to put a bow on this, and then give you an opportunity, because I know you've got some resources you want to make sure that people are aware of. But I love what you just said, because I would imagine, and I know this from some experiences I've had, and then some other people I've been super close to that they've had as well, that it can be so overwhelming that I don't feel like I'm understanding. The information can be so hard to digest. And my prayer is that as people listen to this, that they're able to feel relief from you, from a brother that is incredibly educated, trained, articulate, very easy to understand, that, okay, I can talk to somebody who can give me some clarity for all of the storm that I'm feeling inside of myself, because I have a loved one that's involved in this, or even my own, and I'm just feel like I'm spinning my wheels trying to make sense of what's going on in here, and I just can't seem to even get close to any kind of rational understanding for what's going on in me or around me. So I'm super grateful in the Lord for our relationship, that our Father has gifted you a long time ago with a passion for this particular area of life, because it is so desperately needed and so critical, both for the individuals, but also in an awakening for the church to be able to address this, a very real and present issue in the life of so many of our people, mainly because statistically, there are a significant percentage of our congregations are battling mental health issues. And we cannot contribute in ministry. We cannot contribute to this split between the ministry of Jesus and the ministry of the psychology world. Like, I can go to Jesus for forgiveness of sins, but I must go to the psychological world if I want to get any kind of wisdom or understanding what's going on inside of me. So I appreciate your acknowledging that there's a new trend that's happening. I want to make one other comment and then turn it over to you for your final thoughts. This is just a word of hope for every one of us, regardless of what it is. that you're battling, because as Dr. Valdes said, these things get super intense. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans 8:18, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us." So if you're suffering, and it is in particular from mental health, I want you to know that you're not alone. You are not alone. You're not alone in your mental health issues. You're not alone in your family issues, and you're not alone just in the generic struggle of life. The struggle of life is intense, even for the Apostle Paul. But this life is not what it's all about. It's about the glory of what is to be revealed to us. And if we will persevere and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ, even when we can't see what our Father is doing, we're just going to trust him and believe. Even when we can't see what awaits us, the surpassing glory of what awaits us is going to wipe out every bit of struggle. Whatever the struggle is, no matter how intense the struggle is in this life, what we're going to experience in the life to come is going to wipe out everything. And it will absolutely be worth it. So hang in there, pray, go to your church, ask for prayer. And Lewis, you got some final thoughts and some resources that people can avail themselves of as they listen to this and they're looking for a next step.
Yeah. Beautifully put. And there is hope. My favorite passages around this, every time I read one of the passages, and I'm not good at citing chapter and verse, I'm a more conceptual guy. Wherever it says the renewal of your mind, I love that. The renewal of your mind. You renew your mind daily, all those things. So there's the first place to start, Google it. What is your issue? Google it in every different way that you can express it. I have a child with, fill in the blank. How do I deal with? How do families deal with? You Google mental health, mental illness, all those terms. There is hundreds and hundreds. Google Bible and mental health. There's all kind of stuff that pops up. So, look at it. Obviously, you have to be with the internet. You have to be judicious about it. You can't just accept everything that you read, but, apply some common sense. There's some great, very, very, in an instant, you can start your educational journey on Google. Then comes, in your locality, depending on where you are, everywhere in the United States, there are groups. The Alliance for the Mentally Ill. So the national one is called the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, NAMI, NAMI. And then there's a TEXAMI for Texas, and so forth. Just about every state has one. You can start with those resources to get into some local area kinds of services. Then check the churches around you too, because a lot of churches have AA groups. They've got different support groups for different things like this as well. As you get and don't stop at any one of those. Once you've sort of mastered one level of knowledge, there's always a whole nother layer and level to climb to, and every one of them brings a whole new level of renewal, a whole new level of relief, a whole new level of understanding. And over the course of years, you would look back at what you once thought about mental health, mental illness, and there should be a vast difference from where you start to where you are, a couple of years down the road.
Yeah.
So when you get into the deeper stuff, you have to start getting into more of the professional literature and what I'm calling the crossover literature between spirituality and mental health. Again, something that you can Google for a deep dive for anybody that's already well down that road. My favorite guy is a guy named Shafransky that wrote this. It's just a great book. It's a giant book. It's like, I don't know what, 600 pages or something.
Wow.
Let me give you the exact title. It's an edited book, so it's got a lot of contributors to it, but wow, it covers an awful lot of ground. But this is for the deep dive. This is for people that are kind of already. This is hard meat. This isn't baby's milk. So Shafransky is Shafranske, Okay, and the title of his best book is called Religion and the Clinical Practice of Psychology. He's a professor at a university somewhere, but Religion and the Clinical Practice of Psychology, tremendous book that covers a wide range. And then there's other similar books that are in the crossover literature that are hardcore. That'll really take you to some places where you just kind of go, okay, there it is. There's some real existential elevation that occurs there. And if you're in the and by the way, this is not only in the Christian side. There's other religions that have some of that, and Shafransky covers some of that. In the Christian world, there's some more specific kinds of things that cross over biblical readings and interpretations, and psychological concepts as well. Then some great stuff. There's just a lifelong of reading to be had there. So definitely encourage everybody to get involved in that. And certainly the Bible being such a great resource itself, as a place to, for all the biblical reasons. But that crossover is really good.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, man, thank you very much for allowing us to have you for a little bit. I know you're super busy. Again, just super blessed that God has gifted you. We need brothers and sisters in the Lord on the front lines in every direction. And again, mental health can have such a dark cloud over it. And it's so unfortunate. Grateful that there are men like you and women that have the light of Jesus Christ inside of them. So we're not only, even in what you deal with, we're not only trying to minister to their mental health condition, but also to be a source of eternal life, that they can come in contact with the God who loves them and cares about them, and offers the reality that one day, every single one of us who call in the name of Jesus will be healed and get to experience the fullness and the richness of healed life that Jesus came for us to have. So thank you very much, brother. It's always great being with you. And if anybody has any questions, any thoughts, any needs, please don't hesitate to reach out, jim@trexo.org. We've certainly got local resources here in Houston that you can access pretty readily, that can get you all sorts of different levels of assistance, regardless of what it is that you are battling. And we would love to be able to help you out with that. Otherwise, God bless you. I hope you have a great week. Don't forget to breathe. Don't forget to breathe. In all things, God our Father is really good. So you guys have a great weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.